The jungle never gave back what it swallowed. Beneath its endless canopy, where sunlight turns to gold dust and silence hums like breath, two travelers stumbled upon a relic time forgot. A 1950s car rusted to its bones. Vines coiled through the doors, moss carpeted the hood, and in the passenger seat, blood shimmered wet beneath the mist. Eli Turner stood frozen. Mason Reid whispered, "It's fresh." Then came the locket, warm, impossibly so, engraved with the date June 12, 1958. From the shadows stretched a trail of footprints, vanishing deeper into the green maze. Every instinct said leave, but something in that silence beckoned them forward, as if the jungle itself was watching. What secret could stay alive this long, buried in a place where even ghosts refuse to linger? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The jungle opened before them like a living thing, its humid breath clinging to their skin. Eli Turner wiped sweat from his brow, his hand trembling slightly as he held the locket up to the fractured sunlight. "You feel that?" he murmured. Mason Reid, crouched beside the rusted car, shook his head. "Feel what?" "It's warm," Mason snorted. "It's the heat, Eli. Everything's warm here." But he didn't sound convinced. The locket was warm, unnaturally so, the kind of heat that came from within, not from the choking air or the relentless sun. Eli turned it over in his hand, tracing the date engraved on the back, June 12, 1958. They had already agreed not to stay long. They'd come looking for the old missionary trail, half out of curiosity, half out of boredom. And this relic, half buried in the earth, wasn't what they'd signed up for. The car's door hung open like a broken jaw, vines threading through the steering wheel. Inside, the smell of iron still lingered, fresh blood. Eli felt it, not just the presence of death, but the wrongness of it being new. The red shimmer still wet against cracked vinyl. There should have been insects. There weren't. The jungle had gone utterly silent, except for the slow pulse of wind through the trees. They backed away, each step heavier than the last. Mason wiped his face with his sleeve. "We should go back to camp, report this to someone." "Who?" Eli asked. "We're the only ones for miles." They looked down at their GPS. Blank screen. The compass needles spun endlessly. Mason turned toward the path they had come from, but the trail seemed smaller now, half swallowed by creeping roots. "It wasn't this narrow before," he whispered. Eli pocketed the locket, feeling its warmth seep through the fabric. "Let's just find higher ground. We'll see where we are." They pressed forward. The jungle grew denser, the air thick enough to drink. Flies drifted in lazy circles, but the usual hum of the wild seemed to recede. Every step stirred a whisper, leaves brushing together like soft voices. After an hour, they came to a wide banyan tree whose roots clawed across the ground like the fingers of a buried giant. Something had been carved into its trunk, symbols, half spiral, half human. Deep grooves that seemed both ancient and fresh. Mason ran his flashlight across them. "Looks tribal," Eli frowned. "No tribe around here for decades. Locals said this place was abandoned after the missionaries disappeared. Maybe they came back." Eli said nothing. He was staring at one particular symbol, a circle enclosing a smaller heart. It matched the shape of the locket in his hand. A breeze passed, carrying a scent that didn't belong, metal and salt like old coins soaked in rain. The light shifted. For an instant the symbol seemed to move, not alive but shifting, as if the bark itself was breathing. Mason took a step back. "Let's keep moving." They walked in silence, careful not to speak too loudly. The sound of their footsteps changed, soft earth giving way to brittle fragments beneath their boots. Eli crouched down and brushed away leaves. Beneath was a scattering of bones, small ones half crushed. "Animal," Mason said quickly. But Eli saw something else, the faint imprint of a shoe beside them. A heel mark. Human. He straightened, clutching the locket tight. "There's someone else here." Mason's jaw tightened. "Then maybe they left the blood in that car." "Maybe," Eli said softly. "Or maybe they never left at all. They moved faster now, the canopy closing tighter overhead until the world turned green and dim. The air felt heavier with each breath. The path dipped and rose again, revealing a shallow ravine where a stream trickled through moss. In the water lay something silver, a compass. Mason reached for it and flipped it open. The needle spun wildly, jerking back and forth like a trapped insect. He let it drop unsettled. "This place," he muttered, "feels wrong." Eli nodded. He could still feel the faint throb of the locket in his pocket, matching the rhythm of his heart. He pulled it out and opened it once more. The faces inside seemed clearer now. The woman's eyes looked directly at him, her lips faintly curved and almost like a smile. He blinked and looked again. The photo hadn't changed. Behind them, the jungle whispered, a rustle too deliberate to be wind. Mason spun around. "Nothing, only shadows." "Eli," he said quietly, "mark the trail. We'll follow this stream for a bit, but if we don't find anything, we turn back." Eli reached into his pack, pulling a red marker to mark the trees as they went. But an hour later, when they glanced back, every mark was gone. The jungle had taken them back. Eli exhaled shakily. "It's like it doesn't want us to leave." Mason didn't answer. He just kept walking, eyes forward, his hand on the knife strapped to his belt. The locket swung lightly in Eli's grip, its gold dull in the dimming light, yet its warmth deepened, steady and rhythmic. Something in the distance let out a sound. Not an animal, a voice, low and distorted, calling a name neither of them recognized. The jungle around them swayed, not from wind, but from something breathing beneath it, and though neither spoke it aloud, both men felt the same thought rise like heat. They had not found the jungle. The jungle had found them. By midday, the light filtering through the trees had taken on a dull green hue. The air tasted of copper and rain, and every movement stirred clouds of mist that clung to their clothes. Eli led the way, his boots sinking slightly into the moss. Mason followed close behind, swatting at gnats, his face drawn tight with unease. They had been walking for hours when the forest abruptly opened into a clearing. There, hidden under layers of vine and creeping fig, stood the remains of a stone structure. "Missionary ruins," Mason murmured. "It has to be." The walls had crumbled inward, their corners softened by time. A roofless arch framed the sky like a wound. Statues once holy now leaned at odd angles, their faces melted by years of rain. Eli stepped carefully, brushing away a blanket of moss to reveal carved tiles beneath his boots, fragments of Latin words most indecipherable. He crouched beside what had once been an altar. A broken crucifix lay half buried in roots, one arm missing, the head scorched. Mason ran his flashlight across the far wall, catching glimpses of faded murals, men in cassocks standing beside villagers, all their faces scratched out. "Looks like someone didn't want to be remembered," he said. Eli knelt and dug around the base of the altar, pulling loose a chunk of stone. It came away with a harsh crack. Beneath it was a smaller piece, a corner fragment, rough and blackened by heat. When he turned it over, he saw faint letters carved deep into its surface, redder. "Oblatum," Eli read aloud. "What's that mean?" "Return the offering, I think," Mason frowned. "Offering what?" Eli didn't answer. His fingers brushed something cold beneath the soil, a sliver of metal, twisted and sharp. He dug it free, revealing a small silver pendant in the shape of a tear. It was stained dark, as if it had been buried in blood. A low hum drifted through the clearing, the same distant vibration they'd heard near the car. The ground beneath them seemed to breathe, slow and deep. They froze. Then, without warning, a soft rush of air moved through the trees, lifting the vines like a sigh. The crucifix toppled, its stone base splitting clean down the center. Mason stepped back. "We shouldn't be here," Eli looked up. Above the crumbling archway, a faint line of text still clung to the stone. "Domus expiationis," House of Atonement, Eli whispered. This wasn't a church. It was something else. Mason's jaw tightened. A prison, maybe. They explored the back wall where the ground sloped downward into shadow. There, half collapsed under earth and bone-white roots, lay the remains of a doorway. Eli shone his flashlight through. It revealed a narrow chamber, no larger than a bedroom, its floor littered with melted candles and glass vials. On one wall, a handprint had been burned into the stone, black and crisp, as though someone had pressed against it in agony. Mason exhaled slowly. Whatever they were doing here, it wasn't missionary work. Eli stepped closer. The air inside the small chamber was cold. He could hear faint dripping, though there was no water. A small wooden box sat in one corner, half swallowed by roots. When he pried it open, he found brittle pages, a journal, ink faded and smeared. He turned the first legible page, June 9th, 1958. The sound grows louder each night. Father Rios insists it is only wind, but I know better. The forest is speaking, and it wants what we took. Eli turned another page. They begged us not to dig beneath the shrine. We thought they meant superstition. Now half the team is gone. The air itself moves when we speak its name. The last entry was nothing but a single Latin phrase, repeated 3 times, Rede oblatum. Mason backed away, eyes darting around the dark. It's just old madness, he said. Isolation, fever, bad air makes people see things. But even as he spoke, the vines along the walls began to move. Slow, deliberate. They stretched upward toward the archway, curling over the Latin script as if to cover it. The sound of the forest deepened, the hum resonating through the stone floor and up into their legs. Eli clutched the stone fragment tightly, its rough edges cutting into his palm. The words, "Return the offering," echoed in his mind like a heartbeat. When they finally stepped back into daylight, the air felt wrong, heavier, as if something had shifted beneath the earth. Mason looked over his shoulder. The ruins were gone, not literally, but swallowed by a veil of mist so thick they could no longer see the arch. Only the faint outline of the crucifix remained, half tilted in the fog. Eli slipped the stone cross fragment into his pack. "If they took something," he said quietly, "maybe that's why this place won't rest." Mason's reply was a whisper. Or maybe it's still waiting for someone to give it back. They didn't speak again as they left the clearing. The forest closed behind them, the air turning still once more. But somewhere far off beneath the soil, the hum continued, faint, patient, unending. By the time they reached the ridge, the mist had thickened into a fine drizzle. The world below looked drowned, tree crowns rising like islands in a grey sea. Mason walked ahead, boots squelching through the mud, his flashlight beam slicing through vapor. Eli trailed behind, the weight of the stone fragment still heavy in his pack. The forest had changed. The birds were gone. No wind moved the branches now, and the air seemed thick enough to chew. When Mason finally stopped, it was in front of what looked like a collapsed cabin, only half of it visible above the slope, its roof sagging under the grip of vines. "Here," Mason said. "Old survey maps mark this as the caretaker's lodge." Eli crouched by the entrance. The door was missing, the frame blackened with soot. Inside, a faint metallic odor cut through the mold. He switched on his flashlight. The beam illuminated a narrow room. Shelves toppled, tools scattered, a desk half consumed by termites. Everything was coated in fine grey dust. On the floor lay a single boot print. Small, barefoot-sized, pressed fresh into the grime. "Mason," Eli whispered, pointing. They followed the prints deeper inside until the beam caught on something glinting beneath a pile of collapsed boards. A chain. Eli knelt, brushing the debris aside. It was an iron locket, its surface mottled and wet. When he tried to pry it open, the clasp resisted, like it didn't want to yield. "Looks old," Mason said, leaning close. "Pre-war, maybe." Eli gripped the edge of his knife and wedged it into the seam. The locket gave with a reluctant click. A thin wisp of air escaped, dry, ancient. Inside, beneath a layer of dust, was a sepia photograph. A woman standing by a riverbank, her face soft but half burned away. Someone had scrawled words along the bottom margin in faint pencil, "Keep her from the river." A shiver ran through Eli's hands. "There's a mark," Mason said, pointing. A small burn scar cut diagonally across the photograph, not from age or fire, but something precise, circular, as if branded. Eli turned the locket over. On the back, faint engraving caught the light. ER 1903. He froze. Elias Rourke, he murmured. That's your name, Mason finished, eyes narrowing. They exchanged a look, uncertain, unsettled. The forest outside had gone utterly still. Then faintly came the sound of dripping, but not from rain. It was slower, measured, deliberate. Plop, 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 as though water were falling into an unseen basin just beyond the cabin walls. Mason turned toward the noise. There's something under us. He found a trap-door beneath the rotted rug, its handle crusted with rust. Together they pried it open, releasing a breath of air that smelled like wet stone and iron. A ladder led down into the dark. Eli hesitated. We shouldn't, but Mason was already climbing. The descent ended in a narrow cellar carved directly from the rock. The walls were slick with condensation. Against one side stood rows of glass jars filled with murky liquid. In each floated small shriveled things. Some looked like birds, others unidentifiable lumps of flesh. At the far end, a wooden table stood covered in paper scraps and melted wax. Above it hung an old mirror, cracked down the center. Eli approached. The reflection trembled faintly, as if disturbed by a breeze that didn't exist. Behind him, Mason lifted one of the jars. Preservation lab, he muttered. Could have been a field medic, then why hide it? Eli said. Mason set the jar down and turned. His flashlight caught something carved into the mirror's frame. The same Latin phrase from before, rede oblatum. The sound of dripping grew louder. They both turned toward the far wall. There, half buried under the stone, water seeped through a narrow crack. Clear at first, then tinged faintly red. Mason backed up. We need to go, but Eli was staring at the locket. The photograph seemed different now. The woman's head had tilted slightly, her eyes, they were open. He dropped the locket. It hit the stone floor with a metallic snap, swinging open once more. The air in the cellar grew colder, dense, vibrating with that same low hum they'd heard in the ruins. From the crack in the wall came a faint whisper, words not spoken, but breathed through the earth itself. Mason stumbled back toward the ladder. Eli, let's move. But Eli didn't move. He was staring into the mirror at the faint outline of the woman now standing behind him in the reflection. Her dress hung wet and heavy, water dripping from her fingertips, her burned face tilted as if listening. The whisper grew louder. The jars rattled. The mirror cracked again, a spider-web fracture blooming across the glass. Eli turned just as the cellar lights flickered out. For a moment there was only darkness. Then a splash, loud and close, followed by the sound of something retreating, dragging itself back toward the crack in the wall. When Mason reached the top of the ladder and looked down, Eli was already climbing out, his face pale, clothes damp with what smelled faintly like river water. Did you see her? Mason asked. Eli didn't answer. He clutched the locket in his fist, knuckles white. Outside, the drizzle had stopped. The mist had grown thicker, muffling the trees. They didn't speak again until they were halfway down the ridge. Finally, Mason broke the silence. Who was she? Eli opened the locket one last time. The photograph was blank now. Nothing but burned paper and water stains. He slipped it into his pocket. Someone they couldn't keep from the river, he said softly, and the forest, as if listening, exhaled. The rain began again at dawn, slow and heavy. By the time Eli and Mason reached the foot of the ridge, both were soaked through, the jungle steaming around them like a breathing organism. Mason pulled his hood low and checked the GPS. The screen flickered, lines distorting, coordinates spinning erratically before freezing altogether. Battery's fine, he muttered. It just lost signal. Eli wiped water from his eyes. We're too deep. Compass time. Mason nodded and reached into his pack, then paused. This wasn't mine. In his palm lay a brass compass, its case green with tarnish. The needle spun wildly before locking not north, but toward the river they'd left hours ago. Eli frowned. Where'd that come from? I don't know, Mason said, shaking it. But someone wanted it found. He turned it over. The engraving was faint, barely legible under grime. Coordinates, but impossible ones. 00 dig 0000, 00 dig 000. Beneath that, a scrawled warning, "Don't trust north." Eli's stomach twisted. "That's not possible." "Neither was the car," Mason replied. "They followed the compass anyway. Each time they tried to veer off course, the needle quivered violently, as though resisting. Eventually the jungle opened into a shallow clearing where remnants of a camp lay scattered. Tarps shredded, supply crates split open. It was recent, maybe weeks old, but the smell of decay hung thick in the air. Eli crouched beside an overturned lantern. "Military issue," he said. "Same model my dad used." Mason's gaze swept the clearing. Then this wasn't just a research team. Someone else came looking. At the center of the clearing stood a post, or what looked like one. It was an iron stake driven deep into the earth, wrapped in barbed wire and human hair. From it dangled a soaked leather pouch. Mason drew his knife and cut it down. Inside were papers, handwritten journals, waterlogged and smudged. Only one page remained readable. "If you find this, turn back. The compass lies. North is not direction, it's hunger." Eli looked around. "This is a warning sight. They tried to mark it." Mason pointed toward the tree line. "Then who buried the others?" Half hidden beneath ferns were 6 mounds of disturbed soil. No markers, no gear, just shallow earth and silence. Eli swallowed hard. This was recent. He knelt by one of the mounds and brushed away the top layer of mud. Underneath was fabric, a sleeve torn and bloodstained. His fingers grazed something hard, another compass, nearly identical, except its needle had been snapped clean off. Mason's voice dropped. "They were all carrying them." Eli looked down at the compass still in Mason's hand. Its needle twitched again, pointing deeper into the jungle. He almost swore he heard a faint sound. Not mechanical, but organic. "Like a pulse. Let's destroy it," Eli said. "Now!" Mason hesitated, then struck it against a rock. The glass shattered, scattering shards into the mud. The needle fell free and kept spinning even without its casing. It stopped, pointed directly behind them. Eli turned slowly. At the edge of the clearing, the mist thickened, shapes flickering within it. Faint outlines, human-sized, unmoving. "Don't," Mason whispered. "Don't look too long." They stepped backward, careful, quiet. But the figures stayed still, half dissolved into the fog. Then one of them twitched, a subtle, jerky movement like a puppet's limb adjusting its string. Eli gripped Mason's arm. "Run!" They crashed through vines and roots until the clearing was gone, lungs burning. When they finally stopped, the compass pieces were gone from Mason's pocket. Eli checked his bag. His map was missing too. In its place lay a damp scrap of paper, folded once. He unfolded it carefully. It read, "Follow the coordinates. She waits where north ends." He looked up at Mason. "Someone's leading us." "Or her," Mason muttered. "Maybe it's her." The rain eased. The jungle grew quiet again, but this time it wasn't peaceful. It was watchful. Eli tucked the note into his jacket and looked toward the faint shimmer of light filtering through the canopy. "Mason," he said, voice low. "What if north isn't direction? What if it's where she died?" Mason didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the tree line ahead, because there, among the vines, hung dozens of brass compasses, each one swinging gently, as though stirred by breath, and all of them pointed toward the same place. The ground under their boots had changed. The soil, once rich and loamy, was now dark and slick, as if oiled by decay. The jungle's song, insects, frogs, the constant drone of unseen things, had gone silent. Only the rain spoke, steady and cold, like time refusing to stop. They came upon the tree by accident, if accidents even existed in that place. The banyan rose from the earth like a cathedral, its roots forming arches and hollows, some wide enough for a man to crawl through. From its trunk hung charms, bones, rusted keys, feathers, tied with twine that hadn't yet rotted. Eli brushed a branch aside and froze. Beneath one of the root knuckles, something metallic glinted in the mud. He reached down and unearthed it, a blackened locket, still warm, despite the rain's chill. Mason frowned. "Like the one from the car?" "Smaller," Eli said. "Older." He thumbed it open. Inside, the photo was faint but recognizable. A woman with dark hair standing beside the same car they had found. Her smile was soft, familiar. Too familiar, Eli's breath caught. "That's my mother," Mason's head snapped toward him. "You what?" "She died when I was 10, Eli murmured, voice trembling. "That was before I was even born." He flipped the photo over. The inscription was clear. "For Eli, when you're ready to come home." Mason stepped back, eyes darting to the tree, the carvings on the bark. Symbols like spirals and eyes, overlapping, burnt deep. "How did this get here?" Eli couldn't answer. His hands were shaking. Suddenly a gust of wind rippled through the clearing. The vines shuddered. Something inside the banyan groaned, not wood, but something alive, shifting. The sound echoed like a heartbeat beneath their feet. "Eli," Mason whispered. "We need to leave." But Eli knelt closer, pressing his hand against the root where he'd found the locket. Beneath the bark, something pulsed, slow, rhythmic, as if responding to his touch. He pulled back, startled. "It's alive! Everything here is alive," Mason said. "That's the problem." The jungle began to breathe again. Not the normal rhythm of life, but a deep, collective inhalation. The air thickened, the mist turning heavy, almost luminous. Eli felt something move past him, unseen, like a whisper brushing his ear. "Do you hear that?" Mason tilted his head. "No, what?" "It said my name." He stepped back, but the banyan roots shifted subtly, closing in, not menacingly, but with purpose, as if to hold him still. The sound came again, clearer this time, low and female from beneath the earth. "Come home." Eli's eyes darted around. "She's here." "Eli," Mason warned. "It's not her." He tore his hand from the root and stumbled backward, the locket slipping from his fingers. It hit the ground with a soft chime and split open again. The photo was gone. In its place, a strip of fresh film shimmered in the rain. On it was a single image, 2 men standing before a banyan tree, this very one. One was Mason, the other was Eli. Mason stared, horrified. "What the hell is this?" The image was dated tomorrow. The jungle rustled. The banyan's roots began to twitch, slow at first, then faster, the air vibrating with a low hum that burrowed into their bones. Eli grabbed Mason's sleeve. "We have to go, now!" They ran, crashing through undergrowth, the sound behind them growing louder, heavier, almost like footsteps following in perfect rhythm. Branches clawed at them, thorns slicing skin. But they didn't stop until the light broke through again. Faint and grey. Only then did they collapse beside a fallen log. Gasping for breath, Eli held up the locket again. The film inside had vanished, replaced once more by the photograph of his mother, except now her face was turned toward the camera, eyes wide, mouth open. Mason pushed it away. "That's not her anymore." Eli closed it shut hard. "Then what is it?" The answer came in silence, the kind that lingers after something has been spoken and the world is waiting to see if you heard. They found the journal lodged between the stones of a half-collapsed shrine. The structure looked older than anything human, its carvings eroded but unmistakably deliberate. Figures kneeling before a vast, circular pit. The air around it buzzed faintly, as though filled with unseen current. Mason brushed off the moss and flipped through the pages, careful not to tear them. The handwriting was cramped, hurried, full of crossings out and frantic corrections. "Dr. Robert Keane," Eli murmured, reading the name. "That's the one from the 1958 expedition," Mason nodded. "Disappeared without a trace. The first entries were standard observations, flora, fauna, coordinates. But as the pages went on, the tone shifted. Words grew frantic, ink darker, sentences shorter. Compass unreliable again. North appears to shift daily. One of the men swears the trees rearrange themselves. Voices in the rain last night. Sounded like my own." Eli looked up, his voice quiet. He heard them too. Further in, the pages became more erratic. Paragraphs dissolved into single lines, desperate confessions. "We found the car. I told them to leave it. They wouldn't listen. The blood never dries. The jungle eats memory. It feeds on recognition." Mason traced the last legible passage. "The mouth is not a cave. It breathes. He turned the page, but the rest was soaked beyond recovery. Only one drawing remained, a crude sketch of concentric rings surrounding a black void. The mouth, Mason said. That's where it ends, or begins, Eli added. They followed the coordinates penciled beside the drawing. The trail was overgrown, more animal path than human. Every few steps they found remnants, old ropes, broken lenses, rusted tins. Evidence of men who'd come too close. By dusk, they reached the edge of a ravine. The ground fell away sharply, and from below came a faint, rhythmic sound. Not wind, not water, a steady inhaling and exhaling, like the earth itself was breathing. Mason leaned over the edge, flashlight trembling in his grip. It's hollow. Eli glanced at the map again. The mouth. The air grew colder. Their breath fogged. And from below came a faint metallic glimmer. Not gold, but rust. Mason squinted. That's another car. No, Eli whispered. It's the same one. Down in the ravine, half buried and twisted by roots, sat the 1950s sedan they'd found before. The same shattered windshield. The same open doors. Mason shook his head. Impossible. We left it miles back. Eli's voice was flat. We never left. The realization settled between them like a chill fog. Night came quickly. The jungle's hum returned, louder now, rising from the pit like a chant. Mason closed the journal and stuffed it into his pack. We camp here, he said. At dawn we find a way down. But Eli wasn't listening. He stood near the edge, watching the slow rhythm of the mist rising from below, the breath of something ancient, patient, alive. The last thing he said before they turned in was barely a whisper. What if Dr. Keene never disappeared? What if he's still down there feeding it? The rain began again in the early hours, soft at first, then harder, relentless. Eli dreamed of the car's headlights flickering in the dark, of a woman's hand pressing against the window, tapping in a slow rhythm that matched the breathing pit. When he woke, the fire was out. Mason's sleeping bag was empty. The pack lay open beside it. The journal gone. Eli called his name once, twice. Only the jungle answered, with a single exhale from the pit, long and deep, carrying the faintest echo of a human sigh. Eli found the camera after sunrise, lying in the mud where Mason's footprint stopped. It was old, older than the car, its body eaten by rust and humidity, the lens cracked but intact. The strap had snapped cleanly, as though cut by something sharp. He turned it over in his hands, wiping away grime. The Leica emblem caught the morning light, dull and stubborn, against the creeping moss. He pressed the shutter. Nothing. Jammed. But when he pried the back open, a roll of film sat coiled inside, sticky and faintly metallic. He knew it was madness, but still, he held it up to the light. The negatives revealed faint shapes, silhouettes caught mid-motion. 6 men, the 1958 team, standing near the same ravine. Behind them, a shape darker than the shadows. Eli swallowed hard. Mason? He turned another frame. Mason stood in the same spot, head tilted toward the camera, eyes wide in confusion, as if he was staring directly through the lens into the present. The last frame was worse. Something vast and undefined loomed in the background, its edges blurred, its form indistinct, as though the film had resisted capturing it. A wind swept through the clearing. The camera grew warm in his hands. Then came the whisper, not from behind. From inside, you took the picture. Eli froze. Who's there? The jungle didn't answer in words. The leaves rustled once sharply, and something small fell from above. A strip of undeveloped film, coiling like a dead snake in the mud. He lifted it. This one was new, not aged. Still damp, fresh. Someone still taking photos, he murmured. He followed a narrow trail leading away from camp, each step heavier, the air thicker. The light filtered strangely, bending between branches. Soon he reached another clearing, this one smaller, encircled by broken tripods, shattered glass plates, and torn cloths that might once have covered equipment. At the center stood a camera identical to the one he carried. It was set on a tripod, pointed toward the ravine. The lens glistened faintly, clean, polished, impossible in this decay, and behind it a figure. Mason? The man didn't move. His back was turned, shoulders still, hands adjusting the focus ring. Eli took a step closer. "It's me." The figure slowly straightened, then turned. It was Mason, but younger, cleaner, his skin unmarked by days in the wild. His expression calm, his eyes hollow. "You shouldn't have followed," the double said. His voice was wrong, soft, echoing, slightly out of sync. Eli stepped back. "What is this?" The other Mason tilted his head, almost smiling. "A record." He pointed to the camera between them. "It sees what we forget." Eli looked down. The shutter was still moving, clicking rhythmically, though no one touched it. Each flash of movement seemed to drain the air, like the jungle was inhaling through the lens. The other Mason leaned close. "You were always meant to find it. Every step, every artifact, its memory trying to remember itself." Eli felt a tremor in his chest. "You're not real." "Neither are you," the thing replied. The shutter clicked one last time, louder than before. When Eli blinked, the figure was gone. The camera's film compartment hung open, the roll spent and dangling. He removed it with shaking hands. The new negatives showed only one image: the ravine, the jungle breathing mist through its hollow mouth. But this time there were two figures standing at the edge, Eli and Mason, facing the darkness below, their forms slowly dissolving into the fog. Eli dropped the roll, heart hammering. The jungle had stopped breathing. The silence felt final. He looked down once more at the Leica. Its cracked glass caught his reflection, or what should have been his reflection. Instead, the image staring back was Mason's face. Smiling faintly, eyes calm, mouth moving in silent words. Eli turned away and ran, branches slapping his arms. The whisper chasing him through the trees. Faint at first, then louder, rhythmic, mechanical. Click, click, click. Every step he took, the jungle seemed to take a picture. Eli stopped running, only when his legs gave out beneath him. The air was thick with fog, pale green in the morning light. He sat on the forest floor, gasping, trying to quiet the thunder in his chest. Every sound, the snapping of branches, the hush of leaves, felt deliberate, as though the jungle were listening to his every breath. Then he saw it. A sliver of glass protruded from a nearby tree, catching the light like a frozen droplet. He rose and stepped closer. The glass wasn't smooth. It pulsed faintly, like skin responding to touch. He wiped away grime and stared into it. For a heartbeat, it was his reflection. Then subtly, impossibly, it wasn't. The man staring back had his eyes, his jawline, but deeper lines carved across his face, years older. Weary, the same jacket torn and frayed, with a dark stain on the chest, Eli stumbled back. "No," the reflection spoke without sound, lips moving in rhythm with his own breath. "It doesn't end where you think it does." He turned, searching behind him. Nothing but mist. When he looked back, the image had changed again. Now there were two figures beside the older version of himself, Mason and a woman with dark hair. Her hand rested on the older Eli's shoulder. His mother. The reflection flickered, and her face twisted, her eyes hollow, her mouth whispering soundlessly. "Come home." Eli grabbed a rock and hurled it at the mirror. The impact rang like a bell, but the glass didn't shatter. It multiplied. The box split open, and dozens of small reflective fragments pushed through like teeth, each one capturing a different version of him. One showed him running, one showed him screaming, one showed him walking calmly into the ravine, holding the black locket to his chest. The fragments pulsed together, humming low and steady. He stepped closer despite himself. Each reflection whispered fragments of words, just at the edge of hearing. He leaned in, unable to resist. That's when he heard Mason's voice, faint inside the glass. "Eli, it's me. Don't move. Mason, listen to me. It's showing what it wants, not what's real." Eli's grip tightened on the tree. "Where are you?" "I can see you," Mason said, his voice trembling. "But you're standing where I was last night." Eli turned sharply. "What are you talking about?" "I woke up at dawn," Mason continued, the voice shifting faintly through the reflection. "You were gone. The jungle, it folds. You move, and it rearranges." Eli's heart pounded. "I found a mirror." "I know," Mason said. "Don't look into it again." But Eli already had. This time, the reflection showed only Mason, standing on the opposite side of the mirror, touching its surface from within. His mouth moved, forming words Eli couldn't hear. Behind him, the trees twisted, curling inward, as if being drawn toward something vast. Eli raised his hand. The moment his fingers brushed the glass, cold surged through him. Not the kind that numbs, but one that remembers. He saw flashes. The car, the pit, the faces of the 1958 team, and himself among them, standing beside Dr. Keene, holding the compass. Then Mason screamed from inside the reflection, "Eli! Stop!" Eli ripped his hand away. The forest reeled, spinning. The mirror shards began to fall from the tree one by one, tinkling as they hit the ground and sank into the mud like raindrops, vanishing into soil. When the last piece disappeared, the air fell silent. Eli sank to his knees, shaking. The cold lingered in his fingertips, a faint pulse that seemed to echo his heartbeat. He looked down. His palm bore a thin, glimmering scar, shaped like the compass needle. "Mason," he whispered. The jungle sighed in reply, distant but aware. From somewhere behind him came the faint crackle of a voice. Static, then a whisper through the humid air. "We're almost home." Eli turned, every sense alive, but there was no one there, only the jungle shifting softly in the wind. He tucked his hand against his chest, staring at the faint pulse beneath his skin, and realized it wasn't his heart that was beating in rhythm. It was something deeper, something calling back. Mason found the whistle half buried near the roots of a strangler fig. It was smooth, almost polished, as though countless hands had held it before. He turned it over in his palm, tracing the spiral carvings that wound toward a small hollow at the center. He hesitated before calling to Eli. "You ever seen something like this?" Eli crouched beside him. "Looks old. Maybe tribal, maybe missionary," Mason replied. "But those markings, not Christian," Eli finished quietly. He brushed off a layer of dirt. The whistle was bone, no mistake about it. The weight was wrong for wood, and when Mason held it up to the light, he saw faint marbling inside, like veins petrified in time. They exchanged a look. "Don't blow it," Eli warned. Mason smiled faintly. "Why? You think it's cursed?" "I think this jungle's already weird enough, but curiosity was a hard thing to kill." He raised it to his lips. The instant he blew, no sound came out, only a vibration, deep and low, felt in the bones rather than heard in the ears. The trees around them seemed to bow slightly, leaves trembling, though no wind passed. Birds erupted from the canopy in chaotic bursts, screaming, scattering into the distance. Eli grabbed his shoulder. "What did you do?" Mason stared around. I didn't." Then came the whisper. It moved through the roots first, a rustling beneath the soil, as though hundreds of unseen things stirred just below the surface. The vines trembled, stretching toward the soundless note that lingered in the air. "Let's go," Eli said sharply. They started down the slope toward the riverbank, the ground soft beneath their boots. But with each step, the jungle seemed to hum back, low, rhythmic, responding to something neither of them could hear anymore. When they reached the clearing, the air shifted. A fine mist rolled in from the trees, smelling of copper and wet moss. The water in the river rippled in concentric circles, though no breeze touched it. Eli turned. "We triggered something." Mason nodded, his expression tight. "Maybe a call, maybe a warning." Then he saw movement across the river, a figure, tall, lean, wrapped in tattered cloth, standing motionless beneath the trees. Its head tilted as if listening. Mason froze. "Eli, I see it." The figure took one step forward. Its face was veiled in shadows, but something about its posture, the stillness, made Mason's chest tighten. It lifted a hand slowly, palm outward, and pointed at the whistle. The bone object grew warm in Mason's grip. "Throw it away," Eli hissed. Before Mason could, the ground beneath him gave way. Roots tore loose like tendons, opening into a pit. He barely caught the edge, the whistle tumbling from his fingers into the darkness below. Eli dropped to his knees, gripping Mason's wrist. "Hold on!" From the pit rose a damp metallic smell, old blood and rot. The roots beneath Mason's dangling feet seemed to pulse, twisting around the fallen whistle. "I can't," Mason gasped. "It's pulling me." Eli braced his foot against a stone and hauled him up with a desperate shout. The moment Mason was clear, the pit closed again, sealing as if it had never existed. They lay gasping in the mud, both too stunned to speak. Finally, Mason whispered, "It wanted it back." Eli turned to him. "What did?" Mason stared into the trees, the figure gone, but the feeling of being watched stronger than ever. Whatever made it? For a long time neither spoke. Then faintly, from deep within the jungle, came the sound of the whistle, not blown by wind, not echo, a perfect steady note, like a pulse of breath from something ancient. Mason rose slowly, his face pale. "Eli, that's the same pitch." Eli nodded, his voice low. "Then it's not done with us." The ground trembled faintly again, not enough to topple them, but enough to remind them they were standing on something alive. From above, the canopy shifted, forming spirals, circles like those carved on the whistle. Mason wiped the mud from his hands, feeling an ache deep inside his wrist, where a faint bruise had appeared in the shape of a ring. He didn't say anything, but when Eli turned away, Mason could still hear the whistle's call faintly echoing in his chest, beating in rhythm with his heart. He knew somehow that what had answered wasn't human, and worse, it was moving closer. They found it inside a hollowed termite mound, sealed with layers of hardened sap. Eli almost missed it. Only the corner of the leather cover showed beneath the moss. When he pulled it free, the jungle fell quiet. Even the insects seemed to pause. The leather was soft, as if it had been handled recently. Mason wiped away the grime and squinted at the initials carved into the corner. "H.K. Dr. Howard Keene," Eli murmured. "The missionary lead." The journal crackled faintly as Mason opened it. The first pages were precise, written in neat inked lines, scientific in tone. Day 1, arrival. "We made camp near the eastern tributary. Spirits high. Locals refused to follow beyond the falls. Called the place La Boca de la Tierra, the mouth of the earth. Day 5, found carvings resembling pre-Columbian glyphs. None match recorded archives. One symbol repeats, an open circle intersected by 3 lines. When chanted by the tribesmen, nearby insects fall silent. Curious phenomenon. Mason turned another page. Day 9, one of the workers, Alvarez, disappeared last night. Found only his pack near the pit. The vines there seemed to breathe. "We'll return tomorrow with more light." The ink trailed off at the word light, as if the pen had been yanked away. The following pages were smudged, the handwriting slanting from calm documentation to raw panic. Day 10. Alvarez is back, but he's not speaking. Eyes glazed, skin cold. "The vines won't let go of him. They move when we cut them." Eli exhaled, his hand trembling. "This isn't just a missionary log. It's a field report from hell." Then Mason noticed something odd. The ink in later entries wasn't black. It was brown-red. He touched it, and it flaked off, leaving a faint copper scent. Blood. The handwriting shifted. No longer Dr. Keene's crisp letters, but uneven, almost clawed words. They said, "It listens." The jungle is a body. Every root a vein, every vine a nerve. When we touched the pit, we touched its heart. We are inside something alive. The next line was smeared, but Eli could just make out the car was never meant to escape. "It's the cage." Eli looked up sharply. "The car!" Mason nodded slowly. They tried to trap it. They read on, deeper into the journal's madness. The words became disjointed, alternating between prayer and plea. "Lord, forgive me, for the jungle remembers." The voice under the earth. "It hums my name. I can't sleep." The others dug a tunnel, said the vines whispered coordinates. "The mouth opens when the bone sings." We built the whistle from Alvarez's rib. We thought sound could bind it. Eli froze, staring at Mason. The whistle. Mason's throat tightened. Then it wasn't a relic. It was a lock. The final entry was dated July 19th, 1958, the night the entire research team vanished. "If you find this, do not blow the whistle. It will know." The jungle will close. The blood is its signature. I can feel it beneath the soil. I can feel it in me. Below the writing, a handprint, dark, sticky even after all these years, pressed against the page, as if the author had tried to hold the book shut from the inside. They both stared at it. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Mason said quietly, "You think he's still out here?" Eli shut the journal. "If he is, he's not the same." They packed the journal carefully, wrapping it in a dry cloth. But as they moved on, a faint sound followed them. Not footsteps, not the whistle, but a low pulse, like a heartbeat rising through the ground. Every few seconds, Mason felt it under his boots, a vibration. Small but steady, Eli finally said what both were thinking. "It's awake again." And in the silence that followed, from somewhere deeper in the jungle, a man's voice whispered faintly, impossibly clear, "Close the car doors." Mason turned, but the clearing was empty. He stared down at the journal in his hands, its leather faintly warm, the pulse matching the rhythm of that whisper. The vines above swayed gently without wind, curling toward the sound of his breath. The jungle, it seemed, was remembering them now, too. Eli found it tangled in Mason's abandoned gear the next morning. It had been wrapped carefully in oilcloth and sealed in a tin that reeked of rust and something faintly sweet, like dried blood. He lifted it gingerly, turning it under the light. The carvings were shallow but precise, made by someone meticulous or desperate. The hollow at its center looked natural, as if the bone had been chosen for its resonance. Mason's voice echoed from memory. "We built the whistle from Alvarez's rib. We thought sound could bind it." Eli felt a tremor under his feet, so slight he might have imagined it. The jungle around him stood unnaturally quiet. No frogs, no cicadas, not even the wind through the canopy. Only his breathing and the occasional creak of wood from the trees. Like joints shifting in sleep, he slipped the whistle into his shirt pocket and followed a trail of disturbed leaves toward the ravine where Mason had vanished. The earth was damp, black and slick beneath his boots. He found the remnants of their camp, the smoldered fire pit, the half-buried tin cups. Mason's jacket hung on a root, as though waiting for its owner. Then he saw footprints, barefoot, human, leading toward the pit's edge. They weren't Mason's. The prints were longer, narrower, with strange indentations where the arch should have been, as if the feet had too many joints. Eli crouched, heart hammering, studying the shape. The mud was still soft. Whoever, or whatever, had made them wasn't far. He reached for his radio. Dead static. He switched frequencies, but every channel hissed back the same low murmur, a rhythmic pattern that almost resembled breathing. He turned it off. There, in the half-light of the ravine, he noticed movement. Something shimmered deep below the pit, a flicker of light, steady, pulsing, the same pulse he'd felt underfoot since the night before. He removed the whistle, holding it at arm's length. The air grew colder. A faint pressure settled against his eardrums. Then, without meaning to, he brought it to his lips. The instant he blew, the world seemed to pause. No sound emerged, but the trees bent slightly inward. The vines rippled, aligning toward him like compass needles. Beneath the soil, something shifted, a deep, rolling tremor that traveled outward in all directions. Then came the whisper, not through air, but through bone. "Return it?" Eli stumbled back, clutching his head. The voice wasn't male or female. It was vast, patient, layered with echoes of countless tongues. "It is not yours to carry." He looked at the whistle in horror. The carvings glowed faintly red, the warmth of life returning to something that shouldn't have had it. He threw it toward the ravine. It struck a root, bounced once, and vanished into the pit. The ground exhaled. A gust of warm, foul air burst upward, thick with the smell of iron and rot. Eli gagged, shielding his face. Then the jungle roared. Every unseen creature screamed at once, birds, beasts, insects, as if awakened from centuries of forced silence. Through the chaos, Eli glimpsed movement within the ravine, something vast and serpentine, its skin like wet bark, coiling upward for a moment before sinking back into the depths. When the noise died, the forest returned to stillness. But the vines nearest the pit were no longer green. They were red, pulsing faintly, as if blood now flowed within them. Eli backed away, shaking. His radio crackled again. A voice broke through the static, faint, labored, familiar. "Eli, don't run, Mason." He froze, staring into the dark. "Mason? It sees you now." The radio cut out. Eli's knees weakened. He turned once toward the trail, only to find it gone, overgrown in seconds by roots twisting across the path like veins sealing a wound. The jungle had moved again. He looked back at the ravine. The whistle was gone, but its faint vibration still throbbed through the soil. He whispered to no one, "What did I just wake up?" And from below came the faintest reply, so soft he almost doubted it was real. "Not wake, remember." He fell to his knees, trembling. The jungle wasn't just alive, it was conscious. And now it knew his name. Eli hadn't seen it since the day they first found the rusted car. Yet here it was again, lying in the mud beside his pack when he woke, as if carefully placed there. The clasp was clean, no trace of dirt. The metal even felt warm, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. He hesitated before opening it. Inside, the same photograph stared back at him. But now, the woman's smile seemed different, stretched just slightly wider, as though aware of being watched. And behind her shoulder, faint but unmistakable, stood a shadowed figure that hadn't been there before. He snapped it shut. Mason's voice still echoed in his head. "It sees you now." The jungle hadn't stopped whispering since dawn. It was no longer subtle. Words formed in the rustle of leaves, syllables in the movement of branches. The words weren't English, but their rhythm carried meaning. Return, remember, stay. He pressed the locket into his fist, the edges biting into his skin. "Who are you?" he whispered. The forest exhaled, and from the nearest tree came a sound like fabric tearing. A pale, sap-coated hand emerged from the bark, slender, trembling, half-human. It reached for him, then withdrew as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind streaks of dark red sap. Eli stumbled backward, gasping. His heel struck something metallic, the rusted bumper of the car. He froze. It shouldn't have been there. He had climbed miles from the ravine, yet the same 1950s sedan sat before him, half buried under vines, headlights still cracked. Door ajar. This time, though, there was movement inside. He approached slowly, unable to stop himself. The locket pulsed faster in his hand. Through the shattered window, he saw her, the woman from the photograph, sitting in the passenger seat, head tilted slightly, eyes open. Her skin was grey, her hair matted with moss. When she turned her head, Eli staggered back. Her eyes were alive. "Who are you?" he breathed. Her lips moved soundlessly, then she pointed toward the locket. He opened it again with shaking fingers. The photograph was gone. In its place lay a piece of damp parchment, folded tight. He pulled it free and unfolded it. A map. The same crude design from Dr. Keen's journal, but this version included something new. A second pit drawn beyond the first, marked with a symbol shaped like a spiral. At the bottom, in faint ink, was a name, Amara Keen. The woman from the car, Dr. Keen's wife, hadn't been part of the original expedition, at least not officially. Eli looked up again, but the seat was empty now. Only the faint smell of earth and something floral remained. He turned the map over. On the back, scrawled in the same handwriting as the journal, was a single line. She went willingly. I followed her into the mouth. The vines around the car began to tremble. One slithered across the ground toward him, slow and deliberate. Another reached down from above, brushing his shoulder. The jungle was reacting, not with rage, but with recognition. Eli backed away, clutching the locket. "You're not her," he muttered. "You're using her." But the whisper came again, carried by the wind, clear and mournful. "I am her." The trees swayed violently, leaves falling in waves. He turned and ran through the undergrowth, branches tearing at his arms, until he stumbled into a clearing filled with decaying equipment. Rusted lanterns, torn tents, and a half-collapsed generator marked U.S. Research Division. He caught his breath, glancing down. The locket was glowing softly now, light bleeding through the seams. He opened it again. The photograph had returned, only now it showed not a woman, but Eli and Mason standing beside the rusted car, their faces pale and weary. Behind them loomed the same jungle clearing he now stood in, except in the picture, something else was there. A dark figure, half seen through the vines, watching them. Eli's voice broke. No, this isn't real. But the forest seemed to disagree. From all around came the faint sound of footsteps, dozens, maybe hundreds, moving in rhythm. Shapes began to emerge between the trees. Some walked upright, others crawled. All were covered in vines, their eyes reflecting the same faint silver light as the locket. And then, softly, from somewhere within the crowd, "Welcome home, Eli." He turned, but there was no one behind him, only the locket, swinging in his hand, glowing brighter now. Like a heartbeat counting down, Eli discovered it inside the skeleton of a collapsed tent. The canvas was brittle as paper, and beneath it lay fragments of glass vials, broken instruments, and a single rusted lantern. The compass sat at the center of it all, half buried in the dirt, as though someone had placed it there deliberately, like a marker on a grave. He brushed off the mud and turned it over in his palm. The needle spun in wild circles, then stopped suddenly, pointing straight toward the jungle's heart. The hum beneath his feet grew stronger. He glanced up. The clearing that had surrounded him only moments ago now seemed smaller. The trees had pressed in, their trunks impossibly close, their barks slick with sap that smelled faintly of copper. The compass quivered. He could feel it, not magnetism, but something deeper, a pulse that seemed to sync with his own heartbeat. Every time he inhaled, the needle twitched. Every time he exhaled, it steadied. Eli spoke aloud, his voice trembling. "What do you want me to find?" The wind shifted, whispering through the leaves. The sound formed a single word: truth. He turned again, the compass leading him through a narrow corridor of vines that opened into another clearing, one he didn't recognize. The ground here was different, softer, uneven. He crouched down and pressed his hand to the soil. It was warm, almost feverish. When he lifted his fingers, the dirt came away dark red. He didn't want to admit it, but he knew the color. Blood. And then he noticed the shapes beneath the surface. Outlines of objects, half buried and tangled together, bones, not just human but animal, mechanical, twisted fragments of steel and bone, fused as if grown together. The compass needle began spinning again, faster this time, vibrating against his palm until it hurt. He dropped it instinctively, and it didn't fall. It hovered an inch above the ground, spinning in place, then sank slowly into the soil until only the glass face remained visible. A whisper followed, not from above but from beneath. He buried the key here. Eli's pulse raced. Keen? No answer. Only that steady hum from the ground, a vibration that now felt like breath under the earth. He dug. With his bare hands, he tore through the warm soil until his nails split. Minutes or hours passed, and then his fingers struck metal. It wasn't another car part. It was a hatch, circular, about 3 feet wide, bolted shut. The metal bore the same spiral glyph as on Keen's map, the one labeled the second mouth. He sat back, shaking. The locket in his pocket began to pulse again, its light dim but persistent. The jungle was silent, waiting. Eli hesitated, then placed the compass flat on the hatch. The hum deepened. The bolts began to turn on their own, grinding open with a slow, reluctant groan. A rush of hot air burst upward, thick with the scent of decay. He gagged, but leaned closer. Inside, a ladder descended into total darkness. The compass needle steadied, finally pointing straight down. Eli whispered, "You want me to go in?" The vines around the hatch trembled, as if in agreement. He tightened his pack, slung the lantern over his shoulder and climbed down. The air grew colder with each rung. The walls around him felt slick, not like metal, more like flesh. At the bottom, the space opened into a chamber. Carvings covered every surface. thousands of symbols etched into living roots. The walls pulsed gently, the sound of heartbeats surrounding him. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on it lay a single object, a second whistle. But this one was larger, carved from a different bone. Blackened by age, Eli approached slowly, every instinct screaming to stop. The air vibrated as he reached for it. "Welcome back, Eli." He froze. The voice was calm, familiar. Mason's. From the darkness, a figure stepped forward. His skin was pale, his eyes veined with black. Vines coiled up his arms, pulsing in rhythm with the walls. "It showed me everything," Mason said softly. Keen wasn't trying to escape. He was trying to feed it, to keep it alive. "That's what the mouth is, not an entrance." "A heart," Eli's voice cracked. "What did it do to you?" Mason smiled faintly. "It remembered me." Eli stepped closer. The compass still hummed faintly from his pocket, pointing toward Mason now, or toward whatever stood behind his eyes. Then the vines shifted. The chamber seemed to breathe. Eli whispered, "What happens if we stop it?" Mason's expression darkened. "Then it forgets us. And you don't want to know what comes after that." The ground shuddered. The hatch above slammed shut. Eli turned to the whistle on the pedestal, the key, the last artifact. He understood then. It wasn't meant to seal the mouth. It was meant to open it completely, and he had just been led straight to it. Eli's hands trembled as he lifted the whistle from the pedestal. It was warm, unnaturally warm, and seemed to pulse faintly with its own heartbeat. Mason watched him with the stillness of a statue, eyes fixed not on Eli, but on the whistle itself. "It called you too," Mason said softly. "It always does." Eli shook his head, gripping the artifact tighter. "You don't have to listen. You can fight it," Mason smiled sadly. "I tried. You think I didn't? But it doesn't want us to fight. It wants us to remember." The chamber shuddered. The walls around them throbbed with light, roots shifting like veins beneath translucent flesh. Eli could see faint shapes within. Faces, distorted and moving, pressed into the walls as though trapped behind a thin membrane. He stepped back. "What are those?" "Keen's crew," Mason whispered. "And everyone who came after. It doesn't kill them, it keeps them. It needs memory to stay alive." The whistle pulsed in Eli's hand. He could feel it breathing against his palm, whispering fragments of words he didn't understand, words that made his teeth ache and his eyes water. He turned toward the ladder, but the hatch above was gone. The ceiling had sealed over, thick and pulsing, as if the chamber itself had swallowed the exit. "Mason," Eli said, voice rising, "there has to be another way out." "There is," Mason said, and his tone was strangely peaceful. "But not the way you mean." He lifted his own hand, revealing a scar across his wrist, circular, identical to the spiral on the map. "It marks us. Once you've seen it, it knows you." Eli felt his chest tighten. He looked down and saw faint lines forming on his own skin, curling like roots from his palm upward toward his forearm. He stumbled back, panicked. The whistle dropped from his grasp, clattering against the floor. Immediately the whispers grew louder, the entire chamber vibrating as if awakened. Mason flinched. "You shouldn't have done that." The roots on the walls began to move faster now, converging toward the pedestal. The black whistle trembled, then rolled back toward Eli's feet like something alive. He didn't want to touch it again. But as the chamber darkened and the hum deepened, instinct, or something beyond instinct, made him reach for it. The moment his fingers closed around it, a vision slammed into him. He wasn't in the chamber anymore. He was standing in an open field beneath a sky swirling red and gray. Dozens of tents surrounded him, Keen's expedition camp. Men shouted orders, carrying crates and instruments toward a pit in the center. He saw Keen himself, tall and gaunt, holding the same compass Eli had found. The ground beneath his boots was split wide, revealing an opening, a massive circular maw breathing faint steam. A voice echoed in Eli's mind, Keen's journal voice, calm and deliberate. "We found it. The second mouth, it listens. It remembers. It asks for names." Eli saw one of the men scream as the ground swallowed him whole. Another struck the dirt with a shovel, only to have his arm seized by something unseen below. Then Keen turned toward Eli, not as if seeing through time, but as if recognizing him. "You'll come," Keen said, voice low. "You always do." "It shows you because you are next." The vision shattered. Eli gasped back in the chamber, the whistle burning in his hand. The carvings on the walls were glowing now, pulsing in rhythm with the sound of his heartbeat. Mason staggered forward. "It's waking. You have to make it choose." "Choose what?" Eli shouted. "Who it keeps." The walls split open. A wet, rhythmic sound filled the chamber, breathing vast and slow. The ground split beneath the pedestal, revealing a chasm lined with glistening tendrils. From below came a faint light, and the sound of thousands of voices whispering his name. Eli fell to his knees, covering his ears, but the whispers were inside him now, bleeding through his skull. He saw flashes, the first whistle, the locket, the compass, all drawn into this single moment. The whistle in his hand changed, lengthening, reshaping into something that looked almost like bone fused with glass. Inside it, faint shapes moved, faces, perhaps memories. Mason stepped closer, his own eyes glowing faintly. "Blow it, Eli. If I do, it comes through. If you don't, it takes everything." Eli hesitated. The ground rumbled again. Roots burst from the walls, wrapping around Mason's arms, pulling him toward the chasm. "Go!" Mason screamed. "It needs sound to anchor. You can control it." The whistle pulsed once more. Eli raised it to his lips, tears streaking down his dirt-caked face. He blew. The sound that emerged wasn't a tone, but a deep vibration that shook the entire chamber. The roots froze mid-motion. The air itself shimmered, then folded inward, drawing the light into a single point at the center of the room. Mason's body disintegrated into dust, then into shadow, then was gone. The walls stopped moving. The heartbeat ceased. The whistle cracked in Eli's hand, its surface splitting open to reveal something glimmering inside, not bone, not metal, something alive. And for the first time since entering the jungle, everything was silent. Eli stumbled through the ruins of the chamber, lungs burning, body trembling with exhaustion. The jungle had swallowed the stone passageways again, sealing what had just happened into silence. Sunlight streamed faintly through cracks above, glinting off the shattered remains of the whistle. He didn't know how long he'd been lying there. His head ached from the vibration still humming in his bones, a phantom resonance that refused to die. Mason was gone. The jungle was still. Then he saw it, half buried in the dust, reflecting the light like an animal's eye. A circular lens framed in brass, perfectly unbroken. He reached for it cautiously. The moment his fingers brushed it, the temperature around him dropped. The air thickened, heavy with the smell of rain and copper. The glass shimmered, not with reflection but depth. He lifted it toward the light and peered through. For a heartbeat he saw nothing. Then the chamber as it once was. Clean, bright, the floor dry, the pedestal polished. Men in expedition gear moved through it, their boots echoing softly on the stone. One of them was Keen. Eli froze. Keen was staring at something outside the frame, lips moving. The sound didn't reach Eli, but he could almost feel the words, slow, deliberate. Then Keen turned and looked directly toward Eli, as though aware of being watched through time. The image flickered. Now it showed the same room, but empty, except for a woman standing where Keen had been. Her clothes were torn, her skin streaked with mud and blood. Yet her expression was calm. She held the same brass-framed lens in her palm, the one Eli now held. She mouthed a single word. He couldn't hear it, but her lips formed something like "run." The vision shattered. Eli dropped the lens. It hit the stone floor with a metallic chime and rolled toward the broken pedestal. The walls around him were changing again. Not violently this time, but slowly, subtly. He could see faint outlines pressing from within. Hands, faces, indistinct but familiar. "Mason," he whispered. The glass eye twitched, then stopped. Its surface clouded over, then cleared again, now showing a new image. This time it wasn't the past. It was outside, the jungle floor sunlit and alive. A narrow trail stretched ahead, bordered by ferns. At the far edge stood a figure, still waiting. Eli's breath caught. It was Mason. He picked up the artifact again, but as he did, a sharp pain shot through his temple. The jungle air vibrated faintly, and his hearing filled with the faint rush of whispering voices, the same ones that had spoken through the whistle, but quieter, more measured. The whispers weren't words now. They were directions. Pulling him toward that trail, he stepped forward. The vines around the ruin moved aside, as if aware of his intent. Every sound in the jungle, birds, insects, wind, dimmed. Only the rhythm of his own breath remained. The deeper he went, the more the forest changed. The trunks widened. The light grew amber and hazy, filtering through webs of root-like filaments strung between the trees. Beneath them, the ground was lined with half-buried artifacts, rusted watches, bones, remnants of tents, all covered in the same dark moss. He kept walking. The glass eye burned faintly in his hand. When he finally reached the clearing, Mason was waiting, or what looked like him. His skin was pale, faintly luminous. The spiral scar on his wrist was gone, replaced by a symbol like an open eye. "You found it," Mason said quietly. "It shows everything now." Eli tightened his grip on the lens. "What is this place?" "The mouth isn't just under the ground. It's everywhere. It remembers through us. You can't close something that isn't open, only choose what it keeps." The air shimmered. Through the glass eye, Eli saw what Mason truly was, or had become. His outline flickered, showing two forms, one human, one made entirely of light and root-like veins. "Why show me this?" Eli demanded. "Because you still think it's just a jungle," Mason said. "It's not. It's memory. It's what happens when the earth dreams." A pulse ran through the ground. The trees bent inward, their branches aligning into a perfect spiral around them. In the center, the soil split apart, revealing a reflection of the chamber below, only upside down, like a mirror of what had been sealed. The glass eye vibrated. Eli felt it tug at him, urging him to look again. He did. This time he saw himself, walking into the jungle on the first day, camera slung across his shoulder, Mason laughing behind him. Then the vision shifted to the future, an image of the same clearing, overgrown, decades older. In the center, two shapes lay still, wrapped in roots. Eli dropped the lens. His pulse thundered in his ears. Mason stepped forward, eyes hollow. "It's not showing you what will happen," he said softly. "It's showing you what has already happened." Eli looked down. The spiral scars had reached his chest. His vision blurred as the forest breathed around him. Slow and patient, the glass eye cracked, releasing a single droplet of clear liquid that sizzled when it touched the soil. The jungle exhaled, and everything went silent again. The first sound Eli heard was water, distant, patient, and endless. When his eyes opened, he found himself lying on the edge of a river that glowed with dim blue light, as if the moon had spilled itself into the current. His clothes were dry, though he didn't remember crossing any water. The glass eye was gone. In its place, resting on his chest, was a cracked brass compass. He sat up slowly. The air was still but heavy, the kind that pressed memory into skin. The jungle here looked different, quieter, almost reverent. The vines swayed without wind, and each movement felt deliberate, cautious. He opened the compass. The needle spun wildly, then stopped, pointing not north but to his right, where the trees opened into a narrow path. As he stood, the compass pulsed faintly, syncing with his heartbeat. He followed. Each step carried echoes, voices murmuring low in a language too old to name. He began to recognize the faces hidden in the bark of trees, the outlines of tents consumed by moss, and fragments of bones tangled in roots. But they weren't threatening now. They watched, as if waiting for him to remember something he had chosen to forget. When the path widened, Eli found a figure sitting beside the river. An older man, weathered, his shirt once white, now tinted green from age and humidity. He didn't look startled when Eli approached. "You finally made it," the man said. His voice was calm, kind even. "You shouldn't have touched the lens." Eli froze. "Who are you?" The man smiled faintly. "You know me. You've been following me since you entered this place." It clicked. Dr. Keene, the missing expedition leader. The man in the glass eye. Keene's eyes, though soft, carried centuries of exhaustion. "This isn't a place meant to be found twice," he continued. "The jungle remembers every trespass. Every secret buried becomes part of it. And every time someone digs, it wakes again." Eli stepped closer, showing him the compass. "What is this? Why does it keep pointing here?" Keene took the compass gently, thumb tracing the crack across the glass. "It's not showing you where to go. It's showing you what you've become." "I don't understand." Keene looked past him toward the trees. "Do you know why the jungle took Mason?" Eli's jaw tightened. "It didn't take him. He's alive. I saw him." "What you saw," Keene said softly, "was the echo it made of him. The mouth doesn't kill. It copies. It keeps what it loves." The ground trembled faintly, as if the forest were breathing. Keene stood, extending the compass back to him. "This will take you to the heart. But you won't like what waits there. Truth never points home. It points inward." Before Eli could reply, the man stepped into the water. His reflection rippled and vanished. The current carried no sound, no trace of him. Only the compass remained warm in Eli's hand. He followed where it led. The trail narrowed, the canopy above thickening until the light thinned to amber. Strange markings appeared on the trees. Spirals, like the ones carved into Mason's skin. They pulsed faintly when Eli passed. Each pulse matched the rhythm of his steps, until he couldn't tell whether he was moving forward or in place. When he reached the clearing, he knew it instantly. The center of the jungle. The heart. A massive tree rose before him, roots sprawling like veins, trunk hollowed by centuries of decay. Inside its core glowed a faint, pulsing light, the same shade as the river's reflection. Around it lay fragments of expedition gear, notebooks, bones. And in the hollow's center, something shimmered like metal, Mason's camera. Eli hesitated. The compass needle quivered, spinning wildly again. Then it stopped, not pointing toward the tree, but toward Eli himself. The realization struck like lightning. The whispers weren't from the jungle. They were his own voice, buried deep and returned by something ancient enough to remember it. Every sound he'd heard, every vision, all pieces of what he refused to face. He picked up the camera. Its surface was warm, too warm for metal left in shadow. He turned it over and saw his reflection, but not his as he was now. The reflection showed him older, eyes hollow, hands trembling, lost deep in the same forest. He dropped it. The compass cracked further. A beam of pale light escaped the fracture, stretching toward the heart of the tree. It pulsed once, then again. Calling him, Eli stepped forward, one hand pressed to his chest. "If you're listening," he whispered to the unseen presence, "I didn't come here to take. I just want to leave." The ground shifted beneath him. The roots coiled around his boots, not in malice, but in recognition. The compass needle froze one last time, pointing straight into the hollow. Then, softly, it stopped spinning altogether. Eli took a breath, stepped toward the light, and disappeared into the tree's heart. The jungle was silent again, save for the faint sound of a heartbeat, echoing somewhere deep beneath the soil. The air inside the hollow was alive, humming softly, like a pulse shared by earth and sky. Eli stood surrounded by roots that shimmered faintly, breathing in rhythm with his chest. The moment he stepped closer, the glow shifted color from cold blue to soft amber. It felt almost welcoming. He saw it then, half buried among the roots, the locket. The same one that had drawn them here. Only now it looked different, no longer rusted, no longer red with blood. Its surface gleamed faintly in the light, as though it had been waiting for him all along. Eli knelt, hands trembling, and picked it up. The metal was warm, pulsing faintly in his palm. For the first time, it opened easily. Inside was a photograph. Two men standing beside a jeep surrounded by dense greenery. One wore a khaki uniform, smiling faintly. The other, Eli froze. The second man looked exactly like his grandfather, his throat tightened. He'd heard stories, vague mentions of an assignment in the Pacific years before Eli was born. No one in the family ever spoke of what happened there, only that he came back quieter, changed. Behind the photo, something was etched into the metal. 4 words, "The jungle forgives only those who listen." Eli read it aloud and the roots stirred. The light dimmed to a steady rhythm, pulsing with the cadence of his breath. He could hear whispers again, not the chaotic storm of voices from before, but a single tone, deep and resonant. It didn't speak in words, but he understood it anyway. It was memory, the jungle's memory. His grandfather's voice merged with Keen's, with Mason's, with all those who had come before. Each had tried to uncover what this place was, and each had become part of it. The jungle did not kill them. It kept them. Eli pressed the locket against his chest. The compass, still in his pocket, began to vibrate. Faintly at first, then stronger, aligning once more. Its needle no longer spun. It pointed directly downward. He realized then, this was no curse. It was a return. The jungle had been calling them back to finish what was never completed, to remember, to bear witness, to listen. The hollow brightened. He saw flashes of the past, his grandfather's expedition, the moment they discovered the mouth, their attempts to document it before the storms came. He saw the car, pristine, the blood that marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. He saw Mason, still alive in the vision, standing beside him. "You're not lost," Mason said, voice echoing through the space. "You just forgot where you came from." Eli's vision blurred. "What happens now?" Mason's figure smiled faintly. "You tell it. You carry it out." The light surged, surrounding him completely. His body felt weightless, as though being rewritten into the air itself. Every sound became one. Wind, water, heartbeat, all dissolving into a single note of peace. Then, silence. When Eli awoke, he was lying at the edge of the river again. The dawn light filtered through the canopy, soft and golden. The jungle smelled clean, new. The rusted car was gone, replaced by wild orchids and grass. He sat up slowly, dizzy but alive. In his hand was the locket, still open, still warm. The photograph was there, though the faces were fading, their outlines soft as mist. The engraving remained. He looked around for Mason, but the forest was empty. Only the sound of the river kept him company. When he reached for his backpack, he found the camera, undamaged, its battery indicator somehow full. Inside were photographs he'd never taken. The ruins, the spiral carvings, Keen, Mason, even the rusted car as it first appeared. And one last image of Eli himself, standing before the great tree, eyes calm, light behind him. He smiled faintly. The jungle had given back what it took. Not everything, but enough. As he began the long walk toward the trailhead, he heard the faintest murmur of leaves behind him, not warning, not threat, just acknowledgement. When he reached the edge of the clearing, he looked back one last time. Sunlight broke through the canopy, landing on the spot where the car once stood. The vines shimmered gently, like a wave goodbye. He slipped the locket around his neck and whispered, "I'm listening." The jungle rustled softly in reply, then the forest went still, holding its silence like a promise or a secret kept. At last, by someone who finally understood how to hear it.